Hi, everybody. This morning I was reflecting on the goddess Ceres, also known as Demeter, and her daughter Persephone, and of course Pluto, story between the three. And I was inspired to share some reflections this afternoon because there's a very interesting alignment at the moment, actually, with Ceres, with Pluto, and with Persephone. And I personally have experienced something of late that brought up that story, that mythology, uh, literally in my life with a particular situation. And thus, what typically happens to me when I'm inspired to speak on something, it's always drawn from my own life experiences, and then I get a feeling, an intuitive sort of insight or vision, and that could be through remembering something or hearing something or reading something. And that's kind of what happened this morning. And first of all, let me just say that Persephone, who's going to be the primary focus today, she is a goddess that is basically a queen of the underworld. She became the wife of Pluto, also known as Hades. And the most famous story is the abduction of Persephone, and within that context, the rape and abduction of Persephone. So that, in other words, she was taken against her will. And whilst that story is true, there is also another aspect of this story, and I always knew it. Now, whether I knew it from the point of view of having read it somewhere many, many years ago, and or whether it was my own intuition or the combination of the two, I always knew this other aspect, which is that although Persephone was abducted by Pluto, I heard Demetra George saying in one of her talks, which is pretty amazing because it just affirms what I already knew, and that is that she'd said that there's one story where Ceres and Persephone are tending to the earth, because Ceres is the earth goddess, right? She's the mother of agriculture. It is because of this divinity that we have food and crops, right, and sustenance from Mother Earth. So she rules over the dominion of the earth in that way. And the seasons, summer, winter, autumn, spring, come from this story as well. So when the earth becomes barren, during winter, that's specifically, that specifically correlates to the mourning and grief that Ceres was experiencing, and the rage and anger because of the abduction of her daughter. So the springtime, which is the birth of all things, represents the time when Persephone was able to leave the underworld and rejoin her mother on the earth again in the upper world. Now, in this part of this other aspect of the story, it is said that Persephone and Ceres were walking, along the earth, tending to the garden of the earth, the flowers, the fruits, etc. And at one point, Persephone was sort of deep into the soil of the earth, if you like, while she was picking some violets or something like that. And she heard these screams, howling and screams. And she looked at her mother and she said, Mother, what are those screams and those noises that I'm hearing from deep underneath the earth? And Ceres, her mother, looked at her and said, those are the screams of the dead that reside in the underworld, under the earth. And Persephone was, she was concerned about that. And she said to her mother, well, who's taking care of these people, the dead? Who's tending to them? And Ceres said, well, that is my job as well as tending to the earth itself, the fields and the foods and the crops and so forth, but I don't have enough time to tend to the underworld as much as I need to. And so Persephone had this feeling when she heard her mother say that. And she said, it is said that she said to herself, well, I'm going to go and take care of the dead. That's a very, very powerful part of the other side of the story, because that shows us that whilst Persephone was abducted and taken against her own will, and that caused tremendous pain and grief to her mother, which brings up, of course, the issue of attachment and separation, thus why Ceres corresponds to associated rulerships connect to Taurus and Scorpio when it comes to Ceres. There are other signs as well, but that polarity is very strong in Ceres because it brings up the matter of attachment and separation, or death. Scorpio, death. Taurus, attachment. So given that Persephone had that thought and feeling and desire, really speaks to the fact that whilst she was abducted and taken into the underworld, once she sort of settled in, as it were, into the underworld, she didn't settle in for quite some time. She was in a lot of agony and pain, and was experiencing her own grief because she was missing her mother. So it took her a while to settle in, but the settling in, if you like, came about when she ate the seeds of the pomegranate. And that was like sealing the deal. That was, she was told that if she eats those pomegranate seeds, that she would have to remain in the underworld. And yet she ate them. She ate a certain portion of them, which then became the part of the story where she spent half of the year in the underworld and half of the year in the upper world with her mother. So half the year with Pluto as queen of the underworld and half of the year on the earth with her mother as a result of eating a particular number of pomegranate seeds. And so that shows us that that part of the story that Demetra explained in one of her talks is obviously not only important, but very true. And I bring that up because I've often said when I speak about Persephone that although, there's this story that the most popular and common story is about her abduction by Pluto, which brings up this matter of taken against your will, right? And the resistance she had to it and the trauma she experienced as a result of it. There was also an aspect within her that wanted to be there, that wanted to go there, that wanted to stay there, and that enabled her actually to become an almighty, powerful queen of the underworld, queen of the dead. So she assisted the transitions and the passages of the mysteries of life and death. And that enabled her to be an incredibly powerful goddess. So because there is an asteroid goddess called Persephone, there are two. There's one called Persephone and there's one called Proserpina. Now, Proserpina is the Roman Italian name and Persephone is the Greek name. But there are two asteroids that have been discovered and have been given those names. I typically work with the Greek one, which is Persephone. I do look at Proserpina as well, but when it comes to looking at what's happening in the sky at any given moment. I typically work with Persephone. I personally have Persephone in a very strategic part of my chart. She's connected to Pluto, she's connected to Venus, she's connected to Mars, she's connected to Juno. She's really plugged in the position of Persephone in my own chart. And perhaps that's why I've always had a very strong connection to her story, not only from, a mental perspective, as in reading books and articles and the like, but actually feeling her presence in my life throughout the whole course of my life to this day. I just had a Persephone experience just in the last couple of weeks. So when I speak to this goddess, I speak through my lived experiences. And if you are one of those people that has Persephone significantly placed in your chart, then you have, a strong archetypal identity, if you like, of this goddess Persephone, which is an incredibly powerful goddess, but there is a lot of trauma that can be associated with this goddess, and also the power of the gift in assisting transitional processes in people's lives. Now, whether that's assisting in a literal death passage or whether that's assisting transformational death passages in life that are not necessarily about a life, a soul leaving the body, but just from the context of the different journeys that we go through in our life that are a birth, a beginning, and an ending, which we go through numerous of those passages in our life. You start a job, you leave a job. That's a beginning, that's an ending. You start a relationship, you end a relationship. That's a birth, that's a death. Then everyone experiences the loss of losing somebody we love, whether that's a parent or otherwise. So this process of life and death exists in multiple ways throughout the course of our life. If you are a Persephone figure, you have this power to really assist these transitional passages in people's lives, including the passage of death, leaving the world. And this morning when I was reflecting on all of this, and just another thing that Demetra said, she said that if Persephone is the Ceres Persephone Pluto story, if it's, quite strong in your chart and therefore in your life, or even if it's just Persephone herself, this these points about having the ability to help people in their transitional journeys is extremely, extremely powerful. And also it enables you to access the underworld in a way that perhaps other people cannot. And one example she gave was when I think it was she lost her granddaughter. I don't know when it was, but there was a journey that she went through, in that process. Now, she's of Greek heritage, and so am I, Demetra George. So in our Greek Orthodox religion, we have certain practices and certain rites and things that take place based on that Greek Orthodox religion when a person dies, when a person leaves the world. There's all sorts of rituals involved in that. One of them is that the colour black must be worn in order to mourn and pay respect to the person that has died. And that's one of the sort of sacred symbols and rituals that Greek Orthodox people follow if they follow the Christian Greek Orthodox religion. But that translates to something much deeper in that the wearing of black is a symbol of the underworld, right? Of death, of transformation, of letting go. And I remember when my father transcended, and Demetra had a similar experience, but slightly different, but there were some parallels between her experience and mine. I remember very, very clearly when my father transcended. I I think it would have been perhaps, and this is a really long time, so my story about my dad, the loss and grief that I'm still experiencing actually 8 years later, has been the most intense experience of my entire life. And those of you who have been following me for some time are pretty aware of that because I do bring it up every now and then when it's relevant to the context in which I'm speaking to, such as this present moment. So I remember for the first 12 months, and this is not an exaggeration, I was alive in my body, but I was completely disconnected from this earth and this reality. I distinctly remember withdrawing from everything and everyone because the pain was so severe that I just could not find myself doing anything other than going through that process. So when I did leave my house, which was only to get food supplies, Ceres, everywhere I went, all I could see in front of me was black. And the words cannot convey the image in the real life experience that I had. It was like I was wherever I was, I could see the people around me. I could see the cars driving past me. I could see the earth as it looks on a normal, day-to-day basis. But I was so far removed from it. I was in the underworld with my father. And that lasted for about 12 months. It was so intense, to say the least. And Demetra had a similar experience. She described something very similar to that when she lost her granddaughter. That kind of journey and that kind of experience is a pure Pluto Ceres Persephone experience, particularly a Persephone experience, because it is that archetypal mythological story that you are living through based on the context and the story of your own life at that time. And out of my whole family, I was the one that when my father was admitted in hospital, I went to the hospital and I pretty much made that hospital room my house and his house until he took his last breath. I had taken crystals, silk shawls that I brought from India, salt rock lamps. I was chanting every day for hours. This is while my father was in coma. And I had turned this hospital room into this sacred space that really tripped out the entire hospital medical profession. They told me that. They said to me, in all our years of being in this hospital, we have never ever seen what you have created for your father. Sorry, this makes me very emotional. So, that being said, um, I am a Persephone type of figure. So I created the space for the underworld that was coming, and the day that my father took his last breath was right on my birthday. So he waited for my solar return because he knew that would be important to me. There's many layers to that experience and that journey, but as you can see, or as you can hear, it's very difficult for me to still unpack the complexities 8 years later. And I know it will actually be like this for the rest of my life. I knew that from that moment, and I still know that now. Okay, so I'm going to just take a breath and circle back to the present. So at the moment, Ceres is at 12 degrees of Aries, which means she's actually forming a square to the sun as well. Now, that for me at the moment, that really describes actually what I just shared. You know, the sun is the father, right? And Ceres is loss, separation, grief. And I wasn't planning to bring that part of the story up of my dad in the hospital and the certain space I created and so forth. It just came up, literally. I had not planned to speak to that. So it's just occurred to me that that's really this aspect right now happening in the sky, a square from Ceres to the sun, which is perfect symbolism for what I just discussed. Now, in terms of yourself and, you know, whoever, this may bring up, you know, some themes for yourself that could be related to your own father from the past, or it could be matters in the present that relate to you and your father. And there may be some transitions, transformational processes going on. I actually do know of a person who I just did a reading for recently who is in the hospital as we speak with her father as he is dying. So this is, there's just another example of a single individual that I know that's experiencing this Saturn Ceres square as we speak, for instance. Now, circling back to Persephone, she is currently transiting the 9th degree of Pisces, which places her somewhere here in this chart. It doesn't really matter. Forget about the houses because this chart is based for Melbourne, Australia for around about 1 p.m. today, right on the 5th of July. So the houses is not really the focus. The focus is the aspects between these three archetypal figures that describe one of the most powerful stories and the most powerful allegories to our life death experiences throughout the whole course of our life. So, Persephone being at 9 degrees of Pisces pretty much places her at the exact midpoint of Pluto and Ceres. And that structure of Persephone being at the midpoint of Pluto and Ceres has been in play for perhaps the last couple of weeks and will be in play, you know, for about another week or so. So I'm just wondering if any of you out there are having a Pluto Ceres Persephone type of experience. Now, there's so many ways that you can experience this. It can be, in relationships. It can be, when I say relationships, it can be any type of relationship, because the separation of a relationship, of somebody that you love, or loved, or really liked, that can be with anybody. That can be with a friend, that can be with a family member, with a lover, with a mentor. It can be, it's not exclusive, it's so broad. It's just a relationship of some kind, right? So there's that layer. Then there's, of course, the layer that Ceres brings into this, which there can be a tremendous sense of pain and grief and loss at the moment, due to needing to separate with somebody. That could be because you made that choice yourself, or that could be because that person made that choice, or that could be because neither of you have made that choice, but circumstances have made it so. Because of the nature of the connection, perhaps is so difficult. And it's not because either people are bad or wrong, just simply that the context of each individual's life, and the fusion and the blending of those two souls at this point in time, can be impossible to bring together, even though perhaps both people want to. And it's very difficult to make it happen. So a separation occurs, and there's a lot of pain associated to that, because neither person wants that to happen, but it just happens, or has to happen, or is happening, or is going to happen. That's another layer. Then, of course, this can be more sinister from the point of view of, because we're talking about Persephone being at the midpoint of Pluto and Ceres, this could speak to, for example, there'll be definitely an individual somewhere on the earth plane that is being severely abused and raped at this point in time, because this alignment of these planets is being, activated very, very strongly in their own chart at the moment. So matters of abuse and power of abuse and control and things like that are another theme that come up. This can also bring up matters in relation to parenting issues. This could be two people living together, and maybe there are stepchildren involved. Maybe there's been a loss of a child. Maybe one child has been removed from that family and taken to the other family. There could be custodial battles. There could be a child that has been abused, and that could be inside the family, or it could be outside the family. It could be a young teenager who has been abused by her boyfriend, and has withdrawn into herself, right? Persephone in the underworld. Doesn't know how to communicate what's happened to her, is terrified. There are so many ways that this can play out, because Ceres also corresponds to nurture and food and sustenance. This can also bring up matters that correspond to illnesses with food addictions, such as bulimia, anorexia, and so forth. Those matters can come up as well. Just to give you another contrast, it could be a work situation where members decide to go on strike collectively within the company, in order to make a point of the things that they feel they have lost Remember, Ceres is something that we lose. And Ceres went on strike when Persephone was abducted. She went on strike on the earth. She stopped the crops from growing on the earth. She took all the sustenance and blocked it and stopped it, deleted it. And the people on the earth were starving to death. So she is notorious for going on strike. So we've got to think, laterally and broadly with these mythologies and these symbols and these metaphors. They can play out in so many different ways. Um, and the reason that she ultimately gave the earth its sustenance again is because Zeus intervened. He could see that, the people were dying of starvation. And Zeus, this is quite a humorous point. Zeus being the king of the gods, who overthrew his father Saturn, right, and became the king of the gods, um, he thought to himself, well, if humanity dies through starvation, who the fuck is going to worship us? Now, that's quite a humorous point because, as you may or may not be aware, Jupiter, which rules Sagittarius, specifically Sagittarius, is known to be extremely arrogant. And there it is. It comes even into the context of this story. So, some other psychological themes, if you like, relating to Ceres connect to unconditional love and acceptance, connect to the pathology of loss, which can be rejection, abandonment, grief, suffering, or anger, attachment and aversion. So, attempting to maintain sole control over children, possessions, or creations. Possessions or creations. Think about that. She corresponds to the principle of sharing and of letting go, because that's indeed what she had to do with her daughter. She had to share her daughter with Pluto, the lord of the underworld. And then, she had to release her, let her go into the underworld, and then he would release her and she would come back to it. So there was this sharing relationship going on. So the three of them linked together are extremely important when you see that happening in the sky. And we see that right now with Ceres, Pluto, and Persephone when I say she's at the midpoint, it literally means she's in the middle of Ceres and Pluto. Midpoints, midpoint structures, as I've often said, are one of the most powerful tools in astrology that is lacking in people's astrological toolbox. I rarely hear people talking about transiting. This is a transiting midpoint. We have midpoints in our birth chart, all of us. And to know which ones are important and to know which ones to, pay attention to is very, very valuable, as it is with the movement of, the stars, the planets, the goddesses, the asteroids in the sky at any given moment. I'm pretty sure, I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure no one else has picked up on this right now and is speaking to it. That Persephone at 9 of Pisces is right at the middle of Pluto and Ceres. If you've spoken about it, let me know. I'd love to know your thoughts. And also for those of you listening to what I'm sharing, I'd, love to know how this might relate to you in your life at the moment in the context of the different themes that I've spoken to. So just a couple more themes. Excuse me. So themes of transformation, obviously, are a big core aspect of these archetypal divinities, which corresponds to birth and death, renewal cycles, death and dying, and hospice work as well. You'll find people who are undertakers, that's their role in this world, or who work in hospice, typically will have something really prominent in their chart with these three archetypes, divinities that I'm speaking to today. Single parenting and responsibilities is a very common theme that comes up with Ceres being prominent. And FYI, I have Ceres in my fourth house, and my father is the one who raised three children on his own. And my son's in the fourth. And Ceres is square my moon. So it's all there. It's all in the stars. It's all in the script. So this is why I resonate very strongly with Ceres, with Persephone, and with Pluto, because Pluto pretty much aspects everything in my chart. Okay, so relationship with nature and natural earth energies is another theme. So that can be, your herbal healer, you know, that can be, I've seen some wonderful little videos on Instagram of just young people, like, early 20s, who clearly come from, their soul must be very old. And there's two females in particular that I've just had a quick look-see at, and they are so gorgeous. They just walk around, they find beautiful spots, in the wild, and they just go and identify all these different flowers and trees and plants, and and understand the medicinal component to these, and they pick them and they take them home and they video all of this, and they make their herbs and drinking teas and medicinal herbs and facial body cleansing products, through, because Earth has all the medicine within her, right? We all know that, right? It's just very interesting. So a strong series could also speak to those sorts of interests and practices as well. Growth, productivity, work, and efficient functioning are also themes that correspond to Ceres as well, because she's the goddess of growth and productivity on the earth, right? So translate that into growth and productivity in your current work projects, for example, your work situation. Efficient functioning, that really speaks to the fact that we have to function in this life, even though we may be going through, such deep pain or loss or grief or mourning. We still have to find a way to function one way or another. And of course, she corresponds to occult themes, which is death passage and blood mysteries. Blood mysteries specifically speaking to the woman's menstrual cycle, and so on and so forth, menopause, all those things too correspond to Ceres. And, if you read into the blood mysteries from ancient times and the Elysian mystery rites and all that sort of stuff, the blood mystery sort of ceremonies and functions were a big deal in those times, the different sacred rituals and practices that they had with actual, blood sacrifice and things of those that nature, right? So it goes very deep and it's very, very complex. But those are just some considerations that I thought I'd share with you guys today, because this midpoint structure, as I said, it's been there maybe perhaps for the last couple of weeks and is there right now and will be there for about another week, I want to say. And it just could help you understand, at the very least, I'm hoping it will help you understand perhaps something that's going on in your life right now that corresponds to the activation of Ceres, Pluto, and Persephone. So I hope that helps. And yeah, let me know of your understanding or your questions or your stories. I'd love to hear them. And I'll see you guys very soon.